This is a story about a woman who grew up playing and loving sports. We first meet her as she's realizing a childhood dream. She's starting her first job as a sports reporter in the NFL. And it's not going quite the way she imagined. That's the scene from the audiobook that you'll hear in a few minutes. But first, you'll hear from the author, Brooke Bentley, about how her real-life experiences as a sports reporter shaped this story. And as a special treat, Brooke invited her narrator to join us. When I first found out that I was going to meet this particular narrator, I had that excited anticipation that I need to take a deep breath to calm my nerves, that kind of feeling. Because not only has this narrator won every award in the narrator world that you can win, she's also an internationally best-selling author herself. One of her books, My Oxford Year, is launching on Netflix this summer. And she has successfully launched an app that is a revolutionary new way for audiobook listeners to access their books. It's called Audiobrary. It's a play on the word library. So her success is big. Not just big, it is multifaceted. And that kind of success, that kind of setting goalposts, dreams, reaching them, and then setting completely new goalposts and new dreams, that kind of success felt like an essential theme in our conversation. We are talking with author Brooke Bentley and narrator Julia Whelan about the book Sideline Confidential. So this story about this woman who has this passion and dream to work in sports, in reporting, in football, has so much great passion to it and friendships in it. And as a listener, I think I very quickly realized this was a story with a tightrope. You know, she is balancing a lot in a male-dominated world. You know, the broader story is about that. And I was so fascinated to learn, Brooke, that you lived in that world, that you worked as a sports reporter on the sidelines for the huge Houston Texans. And so I was so curious to wonder if you stood on the sidelines and thought, someday I am going to write a story in this world.
Yes, I got a job with the Houston Texans right out of graduate school. And I attended USC. I was a journalism student there and had these dreams of being a national sideline reporter. It actually been my dream since I was a little girl. I saw a local sports reporter, which was at that time very rare to have a female being a local sports reporter, but there was one in Houston. And I saw her at a Rockets game and told my parents as a little girl, that's what I was going to be. And I stuck with that dream. I mean, it was what I wanted to do. And when I got the job with the Texans, I was really not prepared to work in a male-dominated industry where the men really were not challenged at all. I mean, the men really had run the show for so long in the NFL at that time. And I was the first female to travel with the team. And my boss literally said, I don't know what to do with you. We've never had a woman travel with our team. And my first week of work, he pulled me into the office and said, I think you need to ride your own bus to the games because you're going to be a distraction to the players. And Teresa, I thought, why would I be a distraction? They play in front of 70,000 fans. They play next to cheerleaders. How could I, in my little Gap suit, be a distraction to these men? And they just didn't know where I fit in. And so I walked back to my cubicle and I thought, I'm going to write a book and this will be the opening scene. And I really thought that, and I would journal about my experiences. And then I just got to know other women who worked for NFL teams, and I got to hear their experiences. In real life, my story does not play out like Blake's in Sideline Confidential. This is not a memoir. I ended up riding the bus with the team. I really found my way. My bosses were able to, incorporate me in. So this is not a memoir. But I did keep going back to that bus moment because for me, it was very formative. I thought, why am I riding my own bus? This is so strange. And so that's where I really wanted the book to begin.
I love that that seed comes from your own life. One of my favorite things about Blake in this story is actually her storytelling. You do this thing where she's interviewing, I think it's one of her first assignments. She's interviewing a backup quarterback. And then you take the listener, the reader, to where she's writing her headline, where she's writing what she's going to do as her stand-up. And I thought it was really fascinating. I'm not sure I ever thought of it that way. I think I'm not heavily into sports as a fan even, and it hadn't occurred to me the way that those stories would be written. And so what I really enjoyed about that was it wasn't just about these superhuman stats. She was writing about connection and who he was as a person and making that connection for fans. And I really liked that.
Well, it's funny because I love storytelling. That's why I got into journalism. I mean, there's, of course, in sports, you back it up with stats and it's kind of like your data that you incorporate in, at least for me. But Julia and I talked about this when we were first talking about Sideline Confidential. I mean, she was not particularly a football fan, but sports bring people together. I mean, we were talking about this during the Olympics and how you really just feel like there's this moment where people from all walks of life can come together and cheer for a team or cheer for an athlete, cheer for their country and something bigger than them. And I have found that I played sports as a child. I played them in college. I played volleyball in college. And so I really found that through sports. I connected with people from all over the world, people I wouldn't have known otherwise. And I love that sports has that connectivity. And that's how I like telling stories through sports. Yes, there is a side where it is all stats heavy. My particular form of sports journalism was more who is that person and what matters about them and what can I tell about that person that will keep people engaged and inspired.
Yes. Brooke made a very good point in a conversation that we had about this book at one point where she kind of, it blew my mind a little bit in talking about, like, I understand journalism from a lot of areas, but not sports. And Brooke said that it really is a lens through which you can see, like, you can tell any story through this lens. So it's a story about its personal interest, its business, its human achievement, its socioeconomic, its race, like every possible view of this can come through sports journalism. And I just kind of went, oh, wow, okay, there's a lot more going on here than hut, hut, hut.
Yes. Yeah. And teamwork too, you know, the idea of
collaboration.
Yes, one of the things I enjoyed about listening through Audiobrary is that you do include at the end a really nice chat and conversation between the two of you about the experience of writing it, the experience of narrating it. And one of the things I remember that Julia said is that this is actually about a broader, or can be seen broader, as women in male-dominated spaces in general, that Julia's beginnings as an actor were in Hollywood, very male-dominated, and that there is something relatable about the way that Brooke is writing this character and her experiences.
Absolutely. It felt like a very universal story to me. I mean, it's a coming of age story through like again, the lens that you choose to put on it, through a, maybe, you know, not the romantic coming of age story we maybe think of, but through a workplace coming of age story and defining who you are through the trials that you are put through in your workplace. And I think that is very universal. Anybody who is working in any kind of high pressure, high stakes, high earning world, and even not, I mean, that came out in our conversation too, is just like, what woman hasn't had the experience of being looked down on by an older, quote unquote, more experienced male boss or even coworker? You know, I think it was something that everybody could relate to.
Very much so. I actually had a woman who on Instagram reached out to me. She'd worked in a prison and she felt like this book related so much to her work working in a prison. And she said, I needed that job. And I wasn't one to say, hey, I can go complain. And I felt lucky to be there and have that job. But she really never could find her voice in that industry. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful. I didn't even think, you know, across all these different industries where women have felt marginalized. And that one really hit me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
That is
right.
amazing.
The power of storytelling, though, isn't it? Like, really, you were talking about the power of the story in this story, but also just broadly. I think that's one of the things that I noticed when I was knowing that I was going to talk to both of you is that Julia is also, in addition to being an award-winning narrator, a best-selling author. And in the same sort of vein of fiction, not memoir, but in that writing what you know, storytelling, and using that as a gold mine of how you find your characters and how you tell your story. And I thought about how interesting it is that you've both used that as a path and then also trusted that that will find its audience. I think sometimes we're driven to do what the marketplace is asking us in our storytelling. And yet, if you are true to your own story and trust that the audience will find it, that your voice is something people will want to hear, even in unexpected places like a prison,
Truly.
Truly. Well, I mean, Julia, I have been a fan of yours for so long. And so when I saw that Audiobrary was beginning, I thought, wow, this is a gift. Like this is a gift for narrators and authors, people who want to get their work out there. And I thought, I'm going to just reach out. I don't know anyone, but I'm going to reach out on Instagram and find the people, see what can happen. And so, I mean, it just was serendipitous, but how it all came together. And so, I knew because my novel wasn't a romance novel, and I had lots of agents and lots of publishers think this needs to be a romance novel where she falls for the quarterback. There's all these romantic scenes, and that's not what I wanted this book to be. And so I just stuck with my guns and kept going because I really felt like that was not the story I felt like needed to be out in the world for me. And I love those stories. I love romance. I love rom-coms, but that wasn't the story that I was wanting to tell. And I just knew that if I could get Julia to lend her voice to it, she would capture all of that with Blake. And she did. I mean, I'm just so lucky that it all happened.
But that is precisely what drew me to it. I think if it had been a sports romance, I wouldn't have been as drawn to we should do this. This should be on the Audiobrary shelves as one of our first projects, because what was appealing about this book is that I hadn't seen anything else like it before. Is that it was just a very singular, unique perspective, and I could just tell like the kind of the scent coming off of it was that this was someone who had stuck to her guns and told the story she wanted to tell because it didn't fit perfectly into a marketing paradigm that a traditional publisher would have said we need this in order for this book to work. And it was also just representative of the types of projects that I'm interested in, these kind of genre straddling books. That's always where I find myself drawn the most. And that was what I want to see more of. And I want to be able to find homes for those kinds of books because so often they're ignored by traditional, because traditional doesn't have the bandwidth or the time to put energy into marketing books that maybe don't have that they don't know exactly where on the shelf to put it. And that's a big ask for a company that is doing volume that, I'm not doing that. That's not our issue. So we can choose to work on these books that like Sideline, that just to me was not like anything else I'd ever read.
So let's talk about your vision for Audiobrary and what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in this idea that I think you've won every award there is to win as a narrator. You are in a really beautiful space in the audiobook industry to use that platform. And I'm curious about why you want to go in this direction in the industry, what your vision for that is.
Sure. So biographically speaking, I've been doing this 15 years. I've done over 600 audiobooks and then some. I don't know. I've lost count because there's also work under an alias and, who knows. And to your point, I've had really a kind of humbling level of success in this. And there just comes, for me anyway, there came a point where I just didn't know what else I could do other than to just keep doing the work. And I was getting bored is the wrong word, because this job, as you know, keeps you very, very busy. And but I was seeing that the only thing that was really in front of me was just more of the same. And couple that with my frustration at the way that the job is compensated, that as audiobooks as an industry has grown double digit year over year for the last 10 years and has now audiobooks have now overtaken ebooks in sales numbers, and yet the narrators, if anything, rates are being driven down. And my biggest issue is that we don't get royalties in a traditional setting. With indie authors, there's, in an ACX model, you might have a royalty share, but in traditional settings, narrators are not given royalties. And this is something I've been asking for years, because as an on-camera union actor who still gets residuals from Lifetime movies I did when I was 12, I don't understand how we got screwed out of royalties, frankly. And I was so frustrated with the trajectory that this industry was taking that I was either going to leave, which I have done in the past. When I've reached my limit with something, I have no problem turning around and walking out the door.
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like that was fair I love this job.
Yeah.
And I didn't want the economics to be the thing that drove me away from this job. And the problem is that the only way to make more money in this industry is to just do more volume. And as I was getting older, that's not sustainable and it's not fair. And people are going to get sick of you. That's going to happen. They can only hear your voice so much. I don't want to do 70 books a year anymore. And so I say that Audiobrary, I'm not entrepreneurial. I never have been. I don't particularly enjoy business. That's not something, if I could just be left alone to make my art and have people pay me, that's what I want to do. So all of this is coming from a place of righteous rage. And that's really what's driving me. But as a result, we've created a system where, we're starting off here, we're in our second year, and I do most of the narration because people like Brooke are coming to the company because of projects they have in mind for me.
Yeah.
But we are obviously, I want to be developing that roster, growing the projects we can do, creating the revenue in order to do that. And we are also partnering now, just beginning, with curated titles. So authors or narrators who come to us with finished audiobooks that are of a quality we can stand behind. And we are starting to put them on Audiobrary so that people can find them and use our audience to drive listeners to these projects. And that'll help diversify the shelves and create the kind of eclectic library environment that I'm really going for. And we started a rental model, which is also new in the industry, that allows people to rent the books. Yeah.
I think that when I realized that's the library connection in the title of Audiobrary, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, wait, I can pick a time frame as if I was at my local library and
Yeah.
rent this for a fraction of what I would spend to purchase it. And I'm not tied into a subscription model. I think that's a brilliant idea. And I
Thank
do
you.
think that fewer, I mean, I'm not a technology person either, and I don't really understand why we want to purchase the books and have them in perpetuity.
Yeah, there are very few books that you want to go back and listen to. And, Audible did kind of all of us a disservice by training us to think that audiobooks are a certain amount of money, that the audiobooks are $15, right? It's a credit, right? Regardless of length, regardless of how many voices you have on something, regardless of the cost of the audiobook that it costs to produce, it's going to be one credit. And I've been fighting that a lot because people don't understand that the list price of audiobooks, like what libraries have to pay for audiobooks, what other retailers, who can't afford to take a loss on books the way Audible can, that's not the price of audiobooks, $15. And and then they're taking, a massive percentage off the top as a retailer, which just, the trickle down effect of that is, no wonder the publishers can't afford to pay narrators a royalty. And so the rental model was really our response to that. It's just something that I thought was missing in the industry, and it'll only be available for the titles that we publish ourselves, that we are the publisher on, and the titles when the author or narrator opt into that model. We can't do it on the traditionally published titles, obviously, because that model doesn't exist as a royalty. Like, for instance, it took Spotify a few years to come to terms with the big five on what does a streaming model in the United States look like? How do we pay out on that? And if it took Spotify a few years, I'm I don't exactly have the legal department to go tackle rentals.
It's amazing to me that Brooke, as an author, like connected with that, with even the concept of this online by following you on social media, like made a connection to you, and that you have, from a position where you've kind of met all the metrics of success, set yourself a new challenge that is kind of redefining what success could be in an industry that you're trying to invent something.
I am, well, I've said that a couple of times, and that's why I really appreciate the authors like Brooke who resonate immediately with what it is that we're trying to do and have supported us in that, because I don't understand, why would I take my time, my husband's time, our home equity line of credit to create another audio production company or another audio publisher or another retailer? Like, what is the point of doing what has already been done when everyone, if you got them all in a room, would agree it's broken, it's not working, it needs to change? So, like, what are we doing?
You ask the question, what's broken and how could I fix it? What's a good solution? Maybe.
And this is a take on it. I'm not saying it's the only one, and I'm not saying it'll even work, although all signs are pointing to it's encouraging right now. But this is my take on how to try to fix some of these systemic problems.
Yeah. And it really takes someone like you, Julia, to do it, because people want to hear you and you have this following. And so, I mean, just in my neighborhood book club, I had someone reach out to me and say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize Julia Whelan had narrated your book. I'm going to go get it. And I said, you should rent it. Once again, she thought that was brilliant because, but people do look for you as a narrator when they're looking at audiobooks. And so for you to start this, I think it just lends, I don't want to say street cred, but it does. It gives it a whole nother dimension.
It does. I think, I mean, I had some comments early on from people who, they think they're being helpful when they give you business advice. And so much of the advice was, you got to pick a lane. Like, our first project was my third authored book, was Casanova LLC. And it was done as, it's romance, it was done as duet. And so a lot of people were saying, just cash the checks, like take that all the way to the bank, be a duet romance house. And, you have to be known for one specific thing. And I just simply said, like, with all humility, but just being as self-aware as possible. But that's the thing, is I'm not known for one specific thing. I'm a generalist. I narrate in all different genres and categories. And I think you pick that kind of lane when no one knows who you are. And again, that's just, I'm saying this with all humility, and I hate when women always apologize for having to claim who they are, but I'm kind of doing that. But that is really, that's the point, is I really do want to try to do something different. Otherwise, what is the point? I would like to be working on my next authored book. If it weren't for this larger purpose.
I was reading, though, that your book, The Oxford Year, is going to be on Netflix.
In the middle of all of this.
Acknowledge that and congratulate you, because
thank you.
That seems like a huge win.
Thank you. It's been a long, that project actually began its life as a screenplay. And so I was hired to work on the screenplay. So it was an existing property when I then turned around and novelized it after they asked me if I thought there was a book there, because they knew that was kind of my day job. And I said, oh God, nothing has ever wanted to be a book more. And so the book is really very solidly my version of that story. But as a result, the film has just always been in like some constant form of pre-production for going on 13 years now. And the fact that it's all coming together finally this summer all at once. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It was, I think it's really great news for you, and I'm excited for you. I think that's a great win. It's fascinating that it started as a screenplay, that you were screenwriting first with it, that it's coming back to what it originated as, is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
one of the things that I really enjoyed about Brooke's writing, that this idea in the story, and we were talking at the beginning about a tightrope and sort of, she's finding balance, and there's things in this male dominated world that she has to navigate. There are roadblocks for her. But as we come through the story, and this, I won't give a spoiler, but I think the character Blake really begins to see that she also needs to find balance, that is life balance, that men and women in the industry that she has passion for sacrifice everything for this job. And I think, she says something like, I'm just never going to let that happen to me. She has a growth moment. Like you were saying, this is coming of age. She is in this first big foot in the door job. I really love that you included that in her arc.
I did. I think I used her boss, Blake's boss, Johnny. He was an NFL lifer, and that's the only life he knew. And I saw that with various people that I worked with. They were married to the job. I mean, they had gone through multiple divorces. They hadn't seen their family. They spent holidays alone because a lot of times they were on the road with teams. And so their Christmases were, they would just go to the stadium. I mean, it was kind of like, I wanted to go see my family, and like, no, we just go to the stadium during the holidays. Football, the season falls over Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's what we do. And then I talked to a lot of women as I was in that position, but then as I became a mother, it was so hard for me. And I saw that tightrope of where you needed to be pretty, but not sexy. You needed to know more than the men because you needed to be able to answer anything at any moment, but not outshine them. And then when you became a mother, it was like, okay, you should be a good mother, but don't take time off. Don't take too much maternity leave. I mean, I came back after 6 weeks because my boss was like, it was 6.5. I was supposed to take 7, then he wanted me a few days early. And I saw it and then I lived it. And I really wanted to include that in the novel.
Yeah. How do you today, do you think, personally find that balance for yourself?
For myself, well, I mean, I ended up leaving the broadcast industry. I ended up working some in nonprofit, just like you did after my broadcast career. And then I started writing. And I think 2020, when I was sort of forced in my home and I had these notes and I'd had different rough versions of this book. I had tried writing it a few times when my children were born and I was home, and I didn't get very far. It was very like disjointed, like a collection of short stories almost. But in 2020, I just sat down and made myself write it. And it just kind of kept pouring out. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, Emily, I know what I want her to do. I'd have to like go down to my computer and start writing. So I think now it's easier because I write at home and I have more of a flexible schedule. I don't travel. I used to work nights, weekends, and holidays. Those were when major football events happened. And that's for me meant not being with my family during those times. It was hard. I mean, that was my dream. Like I said, from being a little girl all the way through going to graduate school at USC, I dreamed of being a sideline reporter. And I see women that I had worked with at one point, and they're on national television, and I know them from when we started out kind of as cub reporters. And it can be hard for me to see, but I think having this book out in the world to me was I don't know, maybe felt like my greatest achievement in my career. And I actually talked about this with Julia too. When my ARCs arrived, my youngest son and I opened it and the box, and he held it up and he said, "Mom, you did it. You wrote a book. You're going to be in libraries everywhere." Because he knows going to libraries. I'm like, well, I hope bookstores where people buy it. But he was just, he was so excited. And I felt like for me, I'm like, all right, I'm doing the right thing. This is what I was meant to be doing.
Yeah. And I think in your Instagram recently, you've even talked about we have to find seasons. And Julia's saying, like, I could just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, or I could choose to enter a new season in how I'm using my energy and my time and my passion. And I think that's a good lesson to be reminding ourselves that we are sort of always, or we should be maybe looking for ways to redefine what success is, so that we are not constantly chasing something,
I think one of the things I get asked, whenever I'm talking to college age kids or something like that, and one of the questions will always be, what do you wish you knew then that you know now? And I always like the first impulse I have is to say, and my Oxford year is actually a little bit about this. I wrote about this because I was writing that at another tipping point in my life when I was pretty much done with Hollywood and that grind. And I really feel that this cultural idea that we have about you have to stay true to your dreams, never give up on your dreams. And I don't believe that's true, because I think that part of the maturing process is learning things that you didn't know about what you wanted. And to Brooke's point, like being a kid and wanting to be on the sidelines and wanting that, and then you get into it and you go, actually, this is not really for me. And that's okay. You're not giving up on your dream. You're creating new dreams. You're reevaluating. I mean, that there's a very cute saying about like a crush, like a romantic crush is just a lack of information. And I kind of feel that way about dreams. I mean, it is, you have to know what you're getting into. And when you don't know that, it's a learning process.
Yeah. And you actually don't know until you're living the dream.
You really don't know.
You achieve what you set as a goal for yourself. And it's a real gift to get that, but it's also good to acknowledge when there's more. There's more.
Well, it's not compatible with the other dreams you have. We don't have to have fidelity to one dream.
Okay. When I listened back, that line hit me harder than it did in the moment. You don't have to have fidelity to one dream. I really like that. And we're going to get back to the conversation with Julia and Brooke. They both give some of my favorite answers to the "what is essential to you" question. So we'll return to that. But first, let's listen to a scene from the audiobook. This is from Sideline Confidential, Compliments of Audiobrary, written by Brooke Bentley, narrated by Julia Whelan.
I crossed and recrossed my legs, trying to redirect the nerves raging inside me. It was my first day of work. I had scored a job in the most powerful sports league in the world, professional football. To make it even sweeter, I was back in my hometown of Oklahoma City. I knew climbing the ranks in an industry coursing with testosterone would require toughness and grit. I had prepared myself for that. I just didn't expect my boss, the team's vice president of media relations, to march me into his office on day one. "You have a lot of great memories here," I said. The sweat on my kneecaps was starting to bleed through my cream pants.
"These hanging up are my greatest moments. The all-pro game, winning the championship, draft days. After 3 decades of blood, sweat, and tears in this league, you come away with some epic memories, lifelong friends, and a handful of enemies,"
Johnny said with a smirk. "Have you always worked in the league?" I asked. My body uncoiled slightly as we eased into small talk.
"I'm a lifer. I started faxing stats here as an intern right out of college. I worked my way up the food chain, scrapping and clawing for the best job with the best team. As fate would have it, I ended up back in Oklahoma City, this time as a VP. The league is the only place for me."
"Wow, I can't imagine everything you've seen and done," I mused out loud.
"Blake, the stories could write themselves. Although your ears are too innocent."
Johnny winked. I blushed at the wink, not knowing what to make of his offhand comment. Johnny had been difficult to read from the moment I met him in my interview with the team. 3 weeks ago, he had barged into the conference room, his pristine white sneakers squeaking against the marble floor.
"I have 10 minutes before practice starts. Blake, I'll cut to the chase. Your work impressed us. You're a solid writer and a natural broadcaster, an excellent fit to be our media coordinator."
He had spoken in short clips, bouncing between subjects.
"League teams like to own their media, radio shows, TV shows, podcasts, you name it. We own the media and sell the advertising. Ka-ching. But it all starts on the web. We need to build media platforms of content on our website. That's where you come in."
Johnny had paused and leaned halfway across the conference table, speaking closely and directly.
"You're a local girl, a huge plus. You've got the look to be the face of our team, even bigger plus. But my question is, why do you love football?"
I unclenched the sides of the chair. My knuckles had paled as I had braced myself for a barrage of questions. But this question I could answer with ease. It came straight from the heart, rolling off my tongue with fluency. I grew up on football. So much of my childhood revolved around going to games, watching games on TV, and reliving every moment Sunday night at dinner. My mom once said football is brutally physical and gracefully heroic. That always stuck with me. I love everything about this game. Johnny had tapped a knuckle-sized, diamond-encrusted championship ring against the conference room table, his expression emotionless.
Glad to know you're here for the right reasons. I don't tolerate any silliness. You're hired.
Now, a few weeks later, I was sitting across from this storied league executive as a colleague, although I felt just as anxious and clammy. I straightened my new pink silk blouse, discreetly fanning it below the armpits, and peered up at Johnny. He was reclining back in his leather desk chair.
I've got great bullshit, you'll see. And I love to hear my own voice,
Johnny said with a laugh. I'm sure people like hearing what you have to say, I said, smiling back.
Blake, you're going to fit in here just fine.
Then he paused and looked down at the gold Rolex clasped around his thick wrist. When he looked up, the upturn of his lips had given way to a thin, straight line. I had heard of pro football players flipping a switch. They were nice, affable men off the field. When they stepped on the gridiron, they became an alternate version of themselves, aggressive and primal. They would tackle another human with reckless abandon. Well, Johnny had just flipped his switch. I could see it in his narrow-set eyes, which were storming into a deep shade of gray.
Blake, there is protocol we need to cover so things here run as smooth as possible,
Johnny said. He folded his meaty forearms.
I'm going to cut to the chase. No locker room. You aren't allowed in there.
Yes. I want to say thank you very, very much for giving me your time today. I know that that's our most precious resource. The podcast has a funny name. It's called Desideratum, which is Latin for things that are essential or things we value as essential. And so when I was little, there was a poem that my parents hung on the wall called Desiderata. And it's just sort of life lessons, essential things. It starts off, go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. And I knew when I started having the opportunity to talk to storytellers that that was something that I wanted to talk about, the stories they tell and why they tell them and what feels essential to them. Because I do think that storytelling, like, and this story even, you know, talking about the sort of broader messages of men and women and work and life and balance and sexism and are things getting better or worse? Where are we on that spectrum? You know, from when you wrote it to now, you could argue like there's just this push and pull about diversity and equity. And I think most storytellers are driven by sort of essential things bubbling up through their stories. And so I just like to ask, you know, for you, as you're writing or as you're just going through life, what do you feel like are the most essential things for you? What feels essential?
I think the most essential thing for me, and it's maybe it's getting older, but I also think we are just in such a divided society now anyway, but it can be hard for me to find the well of empathy I once had, but I think empathy is so crucial to storytelling. I mean, it's the very basis of acting, right? And I think it's also the root of writing. And I think that that is what fiction provides for readers, is the ability to really immerse yourself in someone else's life in a way that we can't when, you know, if we're watching a film and you have a visual representation of a character that may or may not look like you, and, you know, you're being kind of given a certain vision of the story that may or may not resonate with you. But with fiction, that's what's so beautiful about it, is you are able to just step into someone else's shoes. And I think that ultimately that is the impulse of storytelling for me, is wanting to go back to this human essentialism around empathy. And as we're getting further and further away from that, I think we start seeing the societal breakdown that results. And so I think that if I were to just boil it down to one word, it's empathy, and it's the pursuit of it, the cultivation of it, and the importance of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. There's something about seeing yourself in others, right? Recognizing the light in someone else, them seeing the light in you, that is the essence of humanity. And when we step too far away from that, that's what we lose. We lose our humanity. We lose our heart for each other. So yeah. And fiction is so powerful that way, isn't it? Because like even Brooke said, like someone working in a prison was like, I saw myself in this character.
Yes, perfect. Yes.
This resonated. Is it just like what a gift to know that your words and your creations and your creativity could bubble into someone else's life that way is really cool.
I think mine is very tied to that. I try and tell my children to lead with an open heart, that they are open to, their heart is open to others, to experiences, to everything that this world has to offer. And then to feel that love, to have that heart open. So sometimes it is going to hurt and it's going to get wounded, but that's okay. And so, and to really feel the feelings. And I think that that's just something that we really talk about in our home is, leading with this open heart. And so it's very tied to empathy, but I just, living your life in an open-hearted way, to me, it is sort of essential for me to feel complete as a person, or feel like I am also making, I won't say making a difference, but bringing light into the world in a way,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be the most succinct 2-word prayer I've ever heard. Be open.
Mm-hmm.
Be open. Like that
Be open. Yeah.
Yes, to all of it.
And I think that's the thing, is the impulse right now is to really like retreat from that, because there is so much wounding going on, and there is so much anger and vitriol and violence, and just there's and we're not unique in that in the arc of human history. This is not the first time it's ever happened, but there is, so we get defensive, and we go into that defensive crouch of not wanting to be open, and I think that's when things really start to break down.
Yes. Yes, a defensive posture is one out of fear.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Openness is courageous. Being vulnerable is maybe one of the most courageous things you can do. So yeah, it's a great thing to be sharing with your children, and a great message to share with me. Thank you so, so much. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful.
Thank you for having us.
What a joy.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Brooke and Julia as much as I did. When you're ready to hear the rest of the story, you can find Sideline Confidential on Audiobrary. Start by visiting audiobrary.com, audiobrary.com. You can also connect with all three of us through our websites and social media. I'll put some links in the show notes. Thanks for spending some time with me. And as always, thanks for listening.